Hello and welcome at our Open Science 2020 event organized by the Young Academy of Slovenia. Pozdravljeni in dobrodošli na dogodku Odprta znanost 2020, ki ga organizira Društvo Mlada akademija. Nadaljevala bom v angleščini, ker imamo gosta iz tujine. My name is Ana Slavec and I'm the Eurodoc Open Science Ambassador for Slovenia and also a member of the Young Academy of Slovenia that's organizing this event. With me from the Young Academy of Slovenia, we have also Matija Zalar and Nate Novak, who is also an Open Science Ambassador. And we have with us our guest, Gareth O'Neill, who I will introduce later. He will give a talk about Plan S today. And we have with us Dr. Tomaž Boh, Director General of the Directorate of Science at the Ministry of Education, Science and Sport of the Republic of Slovenia. So we are organizing this event in collaboration with the ministry, and it is the first in this year's month of science. He will give us an introductory speech. Dr. Boh, beseda je vaša.
Hvala lepa, spoštovana Ana, spoštovani člani Mlade akademije, spoštovani gostje, vsi, ki nas danes spremljate. Lep pozdrav v imenu Ministrstva za izobraževanje, znanost in šport in moram reči, da nam je v veliko veselje, da lahko letošnji 4. mesec znanosti začnemo z tem dogodkom, ki je zagotovo pomemben ne samo za Slovenijo, ampak tudi širše, skratka za napredek oziroma za prihodnost evropskega raziskovalnega prostora, kjer brez dvoma odprta znanost predstavlja enega izmed ključnih mejnikov oziroma enega izmed ključnih kvalitativnih premikov znanosti, ki je morda ali pa lahko rečemo celo zagotovo primerljiv z uvedbo tiska in morda še katerih drugih novih tehnologij v komuniciranje. So, dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear members of the Young Academy of Slovenia, it's a great pleasure for me to be today the part of this event and actually to start our annual event or annual activities named Science Month with this very, very important event. I would like to start with one very, very important quote which says that science is not finished until it's communicated. So it means that science should not be in a way actually just part of the scientific community, should not be only discussed through the traditional academic papers, but should be quite an important part of the societal debates, broader debates, and also the inclusion of the general public is one of the very important elements in this respect. Maybe just for the beginning, I would like to say that our ministry is organizing the Science Month for quite a number of years now. It's the fourth campaign. We started every year in October, in mid-October, and actually one of the major events in this respect is always the Science and Innovation, the National Science and Innovation Awards, which are actually named by the one of the Slovenian very famous scientists, mathematician. He was a scientist and also the supporter of science, Žiga Zois, and also one important inventor and the person working in the innovation Puch, who invented quite a number of important technical things. But nevertheless, actually this year we started with an event of the Young Academy and we will continue with Science Night. After that, we will have, as I already mentioned, the national awards, and actually we will finish a bit more than one month from this point with the Symposium of Slovenian Researchers Living Abroad. So it's quite a variety of different activities, and we believe that actually it is important to include as many different publics in these debates as possible. I'm very happy that today's topic is open science. Open science probably is quite a new thing for many researchers, but actually at the same time, also the online conference like today's one, it's quite a new thing for majority of today's audience and also for researchers. And if there is a necessity to do so, actually we do not ask ourselves whether it's good or it's bad to have such kind of conference. It's a time that it's necessary to do so. And I believe it's quite the same with the open science. There is, of course, many open questions. We could also discuss whether it's better to have traditional publications, traditional bibliometrics, traditional access to the publics and public and so on. But actually, it's more or less, I would say, useless. The time which is here at the moment, actually we have to adopt our actions, our activities and ways of communicating science. And actually in this respect, we at the ministry, we are doing quite significant activities in implementation of these open science ideas. First of all, I would say Slovenia was one of the forerunners in the European in group of European countries when discussing open science. We are also in the first group of countries which signed the Plan S. At the same time, actually, we are quite strong. This is quite strong emphasis of our new strategic document, Research Innovation Strategy of Slovenia, where the open science, not only open access to the publications and open access to the research data is in focus. So we believe that open science is not, not finished in one point. It's a process. We started with open access to the publications. After that, it's quite a big step to come from the publications to the research data. And this is only one aspect of open science. Actually, the next step is altmetrics. Then the next thing is how to include the general public in research and so on. So it's altogether, it's important for us. It's important actually to show the community why the science is important. And I would say, if in the future, of course, there were some points where research and science was important. But today, when we are actually faced with the COVID-19 crisis, the science is important more than ever before in the history. I would also say that this crisis very clearly shows that actually science should be part of other societal subsystems, should be included into the health system, into social policies, into environmental policies, into many others. And because of that, we believe that today's topic is coming on stage just on the right side, just on the right time. And I would like to congratulate all the organizers. I would like to actually invite the keynote speaker today to present us actually the background and the idea of the open science. And I'm actually looking forward for the very fruitful debate. Maybe just to finish, it is important to say that open science it's quite a new thing for many of researchers. It's a new thing for research organization. And it's quite natural that actually it's because of the open science, there are many, many new questions, quite a lot of unknown things, and quite a lot of fears. Actually, for researchers, for example, how I will publish, how the habilitation system will looks like, and so on. But we are all aware that the open science principles are absolutely the right way for the future to communicate science, to actually give the scientific evidence to policymakers and to general public. And because of that, actually, I'm really, really looking forward for the next step of this very, very interesting and important journey. So just from my side, and actually, I would like to pass the word back to Anna. Thank you very much again for invitation.
Najlepša hvala. Thank you very much for this very nice introduction to the topic of today's event, and also other events in this week and other events in the month of science. Now I would like to introduce our guest, Garrett O'Neill, who is a principal consultant at Technopolis Group, where he's working on the European Open Science Cloud. By the way, this will be the topic of the event that we will have on Wednesday. Garrett is an expert in open science for the European Commission and the Dutch government, and he is a Plan S ambassador for Coalition S. He is also a researcher in linguistics at Leiden University in the Netherlands, a member of the advisory group for the Marie Curie Action, and a former president of the European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers, Eurodoc. Garrett will have a talk on Plan S, which is an initiative of scientific research funders to achieve full and immediate open access to scientific publications. Also, the Slovenian Research Agency is part of this coalition, as also Dr. Boch mentioned in his speech. And we had the previous director of the agency as a guest on this event 2 years ago, when the plan was first introduced to the public. It was supposed to enter into force this year, but it was postponed till January 2021 to allow the research community more time to prepare. But now we are less than 3 months away from January 2021. And so we think it's a good time to discuss this initiative again, what changes it will bring, and what it means for researchers. So we invited Garrett to give a presentation about this. After the presentation, there will be a discussion. If you want to ask him questions, you can do so by using Slido. You can do this throughout the speech. The code is 34293. And you can enter questions and vote for questions. While Garrett is getting ready to present, you can check it. It's very easy to use. You can just type sli.do in your browser, and then you enter the code 34293. So now, Garrett, if you're ready, you are welcome to start your presentation.
Thank you. Well, thanks first of all to the Young Academy of Slovenia for the invitation. Anna, can you hear me okay? Just double check.
Yes, I hear you.
You can. Thanks also to you, Anna Neja-Matja, for organizing this, and thanks also to Tomasz for his introduction. I would agree with you, science is not finished until it is communicated. We may disagree on when that communication should be, however, and I would say that we should be communicating from the very start, throughout the whole process and at the end. Some people might say we should only communicate at the end. I'm going to share the presentation, Anna, and I will ask you just to confirm you can see it on the screen. Can you see this now?
Yeah, I see it. I was muted. Now I can confirm that I see it, and also the
perfect
others.
What I will do is, we are talking about open science here, so I do believe we should do open science then. So I will share this presentation with you immediately. There are links in there that you can click if you're looking for more information. All you need to do is take a screenshot of the first slide of the bit.ly or the QR code, or scan the QR code, and then you will have access to this immediately. I'll give it 15 seconds for you to take a picture or scan the QR code or write down the bit.ly link. And I think while you are doing that, yes, I'm going to talk about open access and Plan S, but I'll also probably introduce a little bit on open science, what it is, why we do it, and what are the practices of open science. So I'll give another few seconds for you to take this picture, and then I shall move forward. Okay, then I will assume that you have access to this presentation. So what is open science? How long have we been doing this? So to be honest, we've been doing open science for centuries. We have always been sharing manuscripts to some extent, let's say with our fellow scientists. From the Middle Ages forward, we started sharing much more, of course. We started sharing letters, and at a certain point in time, we started publishing those communications, and then we started publishing our reports of our research until we have the current state today, where we are mostly publishing our research papers in the many, many academic journals that are there. Now, for the European Commission and for most of the member states of Europe, open science became a priority from around 2016 forward, with the publication of this vision here, the Vision for Europe, on what's called the 3 O's: open innovation, open science, open to the world. And this was a way to formalize and link up open science with the current state of science and the current state of policy. So open innovation, the core goal here was to create new products, new services for the European market, driven by science, driven by research, driven by data. And to do that, the goal was to get more of these stakeholders involved. So from academia, from industry, from the public sector, from the general public, and mix them all together and get them working together and sharing and working on science and collaborating. And to do that, we needed to create a system where we could share and collaborate between actors, between these different actors, and online. So this is essentially what open science became, a way to share and collaborate to collaborate with other actors, let's say, with other stakeholders, with each other, and also to share what we're doing at different points in the research process through new technologies and digital tools. And this should not just be for ourselves, so to speak. It should not just be for Europe. This should be for everybody. We should be inclusive. We should share what we have with others, and we should try and pull them in to our research, to our markets. And this they termed open to the world, and to try and have impact, not just on research, but on society, and to open up our borders, let's say, at least in terms of science. So that's been going on since 2016, and which brings us to the core question of what is open science. Problem here is that if you ask 100 people what they understand to be open science, you get 100 different answers. So here is a sample of what I think open science is, and what are, for me, the main practices in open science. There are many more. I'll go through some of them briefly, so we roughly know what it is. Open access. This essentially means gaining access to research publications. I'll go through that in this talk. Very closely linked to that is what we call open data. This basically means opening up your data sets. I personally prefer to talk about fair data. Fair data is where you provide the data sets with specific types of metadata so that the data is findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. That does not mean that the full data set is open. What it does mean is that the data set is machine readable. A machine can read it and know what's there. If a machine can read it, then I can find it through a search engine or an index or a catalog, and then I can actually start doing something with the data to access it, reuse it, and ultimately maybe to link it up to other data sets so that it's interoperable, and that I know what I can actually do with it through the licensing so that it's reusable. Open peer review. This is essentially opening up the peer review process in academia. So typically, for instance, an author will not know who is reviewing him or her, or the reviewers may not know who the author is. And open peer review opens up their identities to some extent. It can also open up the actual peer reviews to the public, and it can even open up responses. And if you take it a step further, it can even open up the full process from the very start. An example of this is the F1000 publishing platform, which I can let you can look up further. Another good example, a good practice of open science is open source. And this in many respects was one of the early drivers of open science since maybe the 1980s, 90s forward with the advent of the internet. And open source basically means opening up your software code, opening up the code that helps you run analyses or supports your research or even is involved in the instrumentation that we use to do science. So it's not just about the publications, the reports of your research. It's not just about the data sets that drive the research. It's also about the source code that helps you support, facilitate, analyze, visualize your research results and your data. The next one is open licensing. So this is about how I license my research outputs. I've taken Creative Commons here. That's usually used for publications. There are other types of licensing standards. You'll notice, for instance, that my presentation in the top right-hand side has a license there. So these are the Creative Commons licenses. Here I've used CC BY. That means attribution. So you can do whatever you want with this presentation, use it, adjust it, sell it. You can do whatever you like, but you must cite me as the creator. I won't go through the other licenses. I'll just note CC BY for the moment. And I might come back to that a bit later when talking about Plan S. And the final one is what's called citizen science. This is basically opening up your research to the general public, not just communicating your research, let's say in a more passive way, so writing popular articles on your research so that the general public can understand, but actually getting the general public to do some work and do research and help with research. A good example of this is Galaxy Zoo, where researchers wanted to train artificial intelligence programs to identify galaxies. Sadly, these artificial programs are not very intelligent, so we have to help them. So what they did was they opened up hundreds or thousands of pictures of different galaxies and asked people to simply click, is this a galaxy, yes or no? Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people responded. This trained the AI algorithms and basically helped us now auto identify galaxies in the sky when we point our telescopes up there. So this is bringing citizens in, and we can even bring them in further, where we get them to help with our research projects, where we get them to even coordinate aspects of research, and ultimately become what we call a citizen scientist. So these are the main practices. Anna, if there are any questions, please shoot. So do interrupt me. I just checked there's no questions up until now.
Yeah, so I'm checking if there are any questions. And for now, we have just 2 questions, but maybe, you know, that were asked in advance before the event. So maybe we should wait a bit more.
Okay.
To remind the participants we have on YouTube, if you want to ask a question, you can do so by going to Slido. So you type Slido in your browser, and then you type the code of the event, which is 34293.
Perfect, thanks, Anna. And just to our listeners, please do ask questions if you have it, and we'll address them as we go, rather than wait till the very end. So ask the questions as they come up. Okay, these were the practices. Why should we do all of this? Yeah, okay, sharing is caring. But a core part of this is that we open up access to our research, to different types of our research, not just publications, but the data, the code. This helps the researcher. If it's open, if it's online, it can be found through a search engine. It can be found by other researchers. It can be found by the public. And thus it increases what's called your discoverability. People can find you. If it's found, they can use it. And this has impact on other scientists, and it can even have impact on the general public, depending on who's looking at this. A crucial part of this is that it opens up what we are doing. Just having a research report saying I did X is not good enough. We should be able to get access to the data to confirm that what is said is correct, that the methodology has been followed, and that the data set does actually say what we say in the article. So we want to replicate or reproduce the research and confirm the results. On top of that, it helps let's say researchers, institutions, or even countries who have limited resources to gain access to data sets, to gain access even to instrumentation that they would otherwise not be able to afford, or perhaps not have, or may need to pay for. So by opening this up, We're sharing with other communities, researchers, institutions, even countries, and we're helping them to save resources, and ultimately we're pooling our resources so that together we have more research, we have more access to research, more resources to do research, support research, and that we move forward much quicker and speed up the research cycle, speed up innovation, and speed up discoveries. And maybe I should just say at this point that when I talk about open, I do not mean a black-white spectrum of open versus closed. I mean open in two senses. On a spectrum, we can have, first of all, open in terms of when I open something. So it could be opened immediately, or it could be opened, for instance, the other side, it could never be opened. There is reasons not to open something. For instance, private data, sensitive data, medical data, military data, intelligence data, even commercial data to some extent. So that may never be opened. It could be used in a closed environment, and open is in a sense in the closed environment, but ultimately it's not fully open. And the other side of that spectrum, as I said, is that it's immediately open. The second dimension is maybe that how much of what you are doing is open. So not in terms of time, but in terms of what you have. So for instance, you might have a data set, you might have many versions of that data set, and you might have different types of data in there. So you might not want to open up every part of that data set or all the versions. You might want to open it up, let's say, only the final version of the data set, and you might not even want to open up all of the data, but only a subset of the data if it, for instance, is linking to an article. So we use a term for this. It's to be as open as possible, as closed as necessary. In other words, we default try to be open, and we may have reasons not to be open, and we take those reasons into account, and we keep closed what we need to keep closed, always bearing in mind that we try to be as open as possible. Okay, let's shift to open access, and let's ask the question, what's wrong with scholarly publishing? I would say a lot right now, and there's a fantastic read there by a journalist in The Guardian in 2017, Burani, and the title of this, relatively biased title of this long read is the staggeringly profitable business of scientific publishing bad for science? My answer is yes, it is, and we need to do something about it. So to give an example here, let's look at the research workflow. Let's look at who does what, and let's look at who pays for it, and let's also look at what they get rewarded for. So a researcher will typically write a proposal paid for by the taxpayer in some cases, if not all cases, and that proposal will be submitted to review. The review process will, of course, take place by researchers who are paid by the taxpayer. If the project is granted, the researcher will then start their project. That could be a PhD, it could be a postdoc, it could be a much bigger project. So the researcher will start collecting data. That's the researcher doing work, paid when it is funded publicly, as in most universities. That's being funded by the taxpayer. And the researcher collects their data, curates their data, and ultimately analyzes the data. Then they write up a report of this research on a subset, let's say, of the research focus. They will, again, pay by the taxpayer. They submit that to a journal, preferably a high impact factor, prestigious journal that everybody knows and loves. That will be put to review by an editor. In most cases, the editor is not paid, so the taxpayer is paying for that, of course. Then this goes to review. This is reviewed by researchers, again, paid by the taxpayer in most cases, if not all. And there may be subsequent rounds of review where the author has to take the comments into account and adjust their article, again, paid by the taxpayer, done by the researcher. Finally, we have the finished product, a published article, and this is where it becomes a bit surreal. The researcher then, in some cases, may have to actually pay to gain access to their own article, and they may even have to pay to get it open. And the public who has paid for this entire process may actually have to pay to gain access to this article. And on top of that, when we look at this entire process and all the work done in the research cycle, we see that researchers are typically only rewarded in their careers and in their grant evaluations on what they have published, not the research they've done, not the data they've collected, none of the other activities that they do, for instance, teaching, supervising students, organizing conferences, organizing or visiting conferences, organizing events at their institution, and so forth. They are only rewarded for the publishing. And this, on top of that, they're not rewarded for everything they publish. They're typically only rewarded for publishing in a good, if not fantastic, journal, and that can make or break careers. So if you publish in Nature, you're guaranteed that you're going to have a top position at a top institution. That's simply the way it goes. Okay, so let's move to open access. Let's make a distinction, a very simple distinction between closed versus open access. Let's say between the traditional model and the future model, the model that we are trying to get to. So the traditional model of publishing is quite simple. It's a paywall system in essence. So what happens is a university library buys or signs a contract with a publisher and buys a subscription to specific journals. Now, they do not buy access to all journals. That would be just far too expensive. So they have to buy access to specific journals. I'll come back to that. So they pay a certain amount, and that means that that library, that research library, that university has access to the journals that they have paid for, if they are not open. So that means that if I am one of the lucky few to be part of a good institution, I will hopefully gain access through my student or researcher account to those journals, and I can read for free. Of course, it's not free, but I don't pay. What happens, however, if you are not in a lucky institution, or that institution does not have access to that journal, or if you're just a researcher who is not affiliated, let's say, but more of an external researcher, you will hit what's called a paywall. You have to pay for one article. That can be $25. It can go all the way up beyond $100. I'm not going to even quote what it can be. And this is a problem. Nobody wants to pay that individually. So we have to find ways around this. And I will come back to that as well. So crucially, the closed model is subscription journals, which are closed to, they're closed unless you pay. If your research library is not paying, then you will have to pay per article. And that's the paid access system that we currently have. Then there is the opposite to this, which is open access. And that's where we are trying to get free access for everybody to read. This is not necessarily about money. It's about getting access to an article, to a journal, if possible, but basically to an article. And the point here is that the reader should not pay to gain access. Actually, the researcher themselves, in my view, should not pay, but that's a discussion maybe for later. And the idea here of open access, there's two simple forms. There are many others, and we'll look at some of them. But basically, you take a final or pre-final version of your article, and you either put it in an institutional repository where others can gain access, or you publish it open in a journal. And to do that, you must, the journal must, of course, allow the article to be opened. And we'll come back to the types of journals and the types of open access right now. Okay, so we know that in subscription models, we cannot get access if we're not part of that library, or if we don't want to pay for an individual article. This has led to many ways of getting around paywalls. The famous one, of course, is Sci-Hub, which I do not recommend you use. Sci-Hub is basically a collection of all articles, an illegal collection, through a catalog, an online catalog, so you can find it. There are other ways to get around it. If you don't want to use Sci-Hub, for instance, you can simply use like what's called the open access button that tries to find, that will notify and try to find a preprint version, or you have what's called unpaywall is another example. You can also just email the author. I've never known an author not to send an article, or you can, for instance, go online on Twitter and put in hashtag ICANHAS, name the article, and you will typically get it back in a private message. So as you can see, researchers are not particularly happy with this system, and they have found ways to get around the paid system when they cannot get access. Now, crucial for Plan S, we need to understand a bit like the openness dimensions I said, and a bit like the data. There's two main types of open access: journal or article. So what we have is we have journals that are subscription models, fully closed subscription models. That's where all the journals, all the articles in a journal are not open, full stop. And then the other side is you have fully open journals, open access journals. That's where all articles in this journal are free to read. So they are fully open, and you'll usually see the open access opened lock, as I have in my presentation there on the right beside them. And then you have what's called hybrid. Hybrid is where it's a blended journal. Some articles are closed, some articles are open. and there's reasons for this, of course. It's a business model that many of the publishers have, and by opening an article, they can lose money, so they prefer not to open everything without earning some extra money. And the hybrid model originally was a way to try and coerce or help support many journals to move to open access, with the idea being that they moved from closed to open. And what we've noticed is instead of moving from closed to open, they've stopped at hybrid. There's so many hybrid journals now, it's ridiculous. And that in itself has become a business model because it earns a lot of money. And you'll see that this is a problem for Plan S. The second dimension is when the article is opened. So we have articles that are never opened because they're subscription and closed. We have articles that are made immediately open in open access journals, or if you pay a fee, I'll come back to that. And we have, again, a kind of intermediate form, which I do not consider personally open access, where the article is opened, not immediately, but after an embargo period, and then it is open. These embargo periods are typically 6 months, 12 months, or 24 months, depending on the prestigiousness of the journal. And the reason for this embargo is so that the publisher can earn money for 6 months, 12 months, 24 months before opening. And their calculation, it depends on the journal, but they always say that they need 6 months to 12 months to actually make revenue before they open it. So these are the two dimensions: fully open access versus fully closed journals, and immediate open access of an article versus closed access of an article. Okay, then we come into the color system, which gets confusing. There's so many of these different colors. I'll focus on three. These are what we call the routes to open access. So we have what's called green open access. This is where I take a version of my publication. It could be final, but that's typically not allowed by the publisher. So it will often be a pre-final version of the article. That's going to be important for Plan S. And I take that and I put it in my institutional repository. Sometimes I may even be mandated to do it. So in Leiden, for instance, I will take my publication, I put it in the repository in Leiden, and then it is accessible through the digital library if you are a member in Leiden. The University of Liège, for instance, under Bernard Rentier, mandated green open access to all researchers. If they didn't do it, it even had an effect on their careers. I do believe one professor was fired for not doing this. What basically the mandate said was that any publication you have, you must put a pre-final or final version in our repository, and we will check. So this is a bit like a precursor to Plan S. The second color is gold. This is the famous one. Gold basically means you pay the publisher to open the article immediately. So this will typically be a subscription journal, and they give the offer of, if you want us to make this open, you have to pay us. This is called an article processing charge. I personally have no issue with paying a publisher to do their job. There has to be a payment somewhere. This is never free. The question here is who pays and what do we pay and what do we get for it? So APCs, that's where the researcher pays. Usually it will come from a research budget or a funding budget, but not always. And the question is, how much do we pay? Now, some people claim that this can be done between 100 and 200 euros. That's for a simple journal, and that's a small fee, let's say. Others claim it should be a bit higher if it's a big journal with lots of submissions and lots of rejections. And that's what we call fair open access publishing. That's somewhere between, let's say, let's take a guess and say between 0 to 750, maybe up to 1,000 euros per article. And then we have beyond 1,000. And this is where we see that there is a link between APC and the prestigiousness of a journal. Many of the Elsevier journals or Springer Nature journals will sit between 1,000 to maybe 2,500 euros. And what we also see then is it goes beyond that for top journals. You can have APCs of 4,000, if not beyond, euros per article. And the question is, what are we getting for this? And we don't really know. So we basically pay to get access, give access to our articles immediately, but we never know why these fees differ, and we never know what's really in the fee. So an example would be going to a mechanic with your car, saying there's something wrong with my car, can you fix it? And you come back at the end of the day and they say, okay, I fixed it, it's 5,000 euros, here's your bill, and it says car was fixed. And you say, well, what did you do? Why is it costing 5,000 euros? And they say, well, I had to fix it. So this is comparable in many cases to the billing of article processing charges and of what we're paying for in academia to commercial and non-commercial publishers. And the final type of open access is what's called diamond or platinum. That means that there's no fees involved to read or to publish. Now, it does cost money and they have to gain revenue from somewhere. For instance, a ministry can support a journal or a publisher, or it can be a funder, a national funder that supports a journal or a publisher, or it could even be donations supporting the journal or the publisher. They have different business models, but the core part is I do not read. I do not pay to read as a reader, and as a researcher, I do not pay to publish. And this is my preferred journal type or open access model. And what we do know is of all open access journals, 75% are diamond. However, they are typically not the most prestigious. We do see that when they are prestigious, fees come in and get higher. These are the types of open access. Maybe just to finally say here that the APCs, yes, they do differ. We have these models of open access. There are other ones, but crucially for Plan S, we are talking about green and we are talking about gold. Maybe a final point here is just to say that in academia, there are probably 6 commercial and mostly commercial, but also non-commercial publishers who dominate and control the market, who have carved out huge chunks of the market, and who are manipulating and perhaps even abusing their market dominance. I've no problem naming them. They are Elsevier, Springer Nature, Taylor and Francis, Wiley, Sage, and the Society, the American Chemical Society. They dominate the market. And to give you an example of a society publisher, I do believe that the American Chemical Society has a turnover of somewhere around towards €500 million per year, much of it coming from publishing. So when we talk about academic publishing, we are talking about a market worth around €10 billion per year. In other words, you, the taxpayer, are paying €10 billion per year to publishers to publish the work you are doing and you are paying for. So €10 billion a year is what we are paying. Okay, so final point for Plan S is the licenses. As I said, we have the Creative Commons suite. There's 4 main types which you can mix and match. You have CC BY. This is attribution. That means you must cite me. Do what you want, but you must cite me. We have CC/NC. This means you can do what you want, but you cannot make profit off it, and you can't sell it. So that's NC, non-commercial. We have CC/ND, no derivatives. This means you can't really do anything you want. You cannot adjust it without asking me first. That means you cannot change what I have put out there. So an example here with ND, if my presentation said ND, you could take it, you could sell it, you could use it, you could show it. But if you change anything in there, for instance, the color or a word or a picture, you are breaking copyright law, and I can then take you to court. The final one is CCSA, share alike. We have copyright, so this is termed usually copyleft. It's a viral copyright. It means whatever I do, if I put CCSA, you must do the same when you share it, and if you adjust it and so forth. So if I have mine tagged as CC BY SA, when you do something and share it from my work, it must also be CC BY SA. It's a way of controlling your creativity and making sure that everybody follows your own ideology. So you can put these together. You could have CC BY, NC, ND, SA, for instance, and you can mix and match. These licenses will be important for Plan S, as I've said. Okay, and the final point maybe before I come to Plan S, and this will be also relevant for Anna and her colleagues who are representing LADA Academia and by extension Eurodoc. To keep in mind in academia, we have many issues. The first one here on the left is the publication system, publish or perish. This is highly problematic for researchers. They are forced to publish as much as possible in the best journals as possible to move forward in their careers. And this is the focus, and it's a perverse focus. The second one is open science, what we're talking about now. We want everybody to do this. We want researchers to do this. However, most of them do not know what it is, and many of them, if not the majority of them, are not supported to do this. For instance, if I want to know more about open access, where do I go? Can I go to my institution? If I want to make my data open or make it fair, who do I go to? Is there, for instance, a data steward at my institution? And what else is there in open science? And what mandates are there from my institution or even from my funder or even from the government? Where do I find this out? And the final one, much of the pressures in academia, the publisher-perish infrastructure, and this drive to publish, let's say, has caused a lot of issues in academia, especially in terms of mental health. Maybe Anna will say something about that later, I don't know. But these are some of the core issues for researchers which we need to take in mind when we start thinking about the publishing system and changing it. These are always there in the background. Okay, Plan S. Plan S came out about two...
We have some questions maybe before.
Shoot.
So we received questions from the public. First question we have, so are there any plans to negotiate contracts with big publishers on the EU level?
Big publishers. So it's hard to know what's meant there by EU level, as in, you're talking about collaborations or consortia or so, but my response here would be most of the agreements that take place are between institutions and the publisher through what are typically called secret big deals. We don't know what's paid. There are usually non-disclosure agreements in place so that you can't share what's paid. And the point of this with the publishers was nobody knows what the other is paying. Everybody thinks they're getting a deal. And what we now start to realize is nobody's getting a deal. Everybody's paying more than they should be paying. That's institution and publisher. Now, what we also have now are collections or consortia of research libraries who are negotiating with publishers, the major ones, right? So when we group together, we have more pushback and power. An example of this, for instance, is in the Netherlands. We have a consortia of all the universities, research libraries, and they make deals as a whole, let's say, with certain publishers like Elsevier or Springer Nature. There is an initiative called the OA 2020, the Open Access Alliance 2020. They were aiming for open access by 2020. We're not there yet, so I'm not sure if they're going to change their name. But that's a collection of over 140 stakeholders, research libraries, funders, other actors in this field who have come together to make demands to commercial publishers. Big commercial publishers like Elsevier, Taylor and Francis, Wiley, Springer Nature particularly. Now on EU level, there's no real direct negotiations happening. I do know about a year or so ago, two complaints were put into the European Commission, the Ombudsman, saying that some of the publishers were abusing their market dominance and to look deeper into what's going on in academic publishing, that in principle there was no market. Now, in both cases, these applications for further research were rejected. No dominance or no bad practices were found, but the Commission has said they will keep an eye on this, whatever that means. So let's see how that progresses. But that they're the different levels, let's say, of the negotiations. Is there another question, Anna?
Yes, there is another general question about open access, and it is how to fight the attempts where open science and open access are confronted with fake data. I'm not sure what the person who asked it intended, but maybe. So how to fight the attempts where open science and open access are confronted with fake data?
So I'm guessing what's meant here is probably predatory publishing in fake journals or journals that are purely there to make a profit and don't do anything scientific. So that's not just about data, but that's got nothing to do with open science or open access. That's got to do with the scientific peer review process. So let me give you an example. First of all, a journal should have a peer review process in place. And if that does not follow certain standards, then it's not trustworthy. There are standards called COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, I think it is, don't quote me on that. So if your journal is recognized as following these, it's a journal that is methodologically sound. Now, that's an example. There has to be high quality peer review in place. In other words, there has to be peer review and they should do their job, the reviewers. So if they're provided a report and they need access to data, they should be given access to the data. If they do not get access to the data, it's up to them to decide on reject or not. If they do get access to the data, they should be checking it so that it actually conforms to what's being written in the publication. Now, we know that the journal type tells us nothing about whether it's good or bad data. So a famous case in the Netherlands is Diederik Stapel, a psychology professor who for many years lied and created his own data and adjusted his own data. And as a consequence of being found out, 55 plus of his research publications had to be pulled from journals, many of them in top journals like, for instance, Nature. How did it get through? Good question. They said they never got access to the data. They did not push. Many of them knew Diederik, were his friends, so they said, oh, I'm sure it's fine, he's a good guy. And that's not the case. They did not follow peer review ethics. So publishing in Nature did not guarantee that it was actually quality research, methodologically sound research, but actually was fraudulent. So the prestigiousness and impact factor of the journal does not always guarantee this. I would even go further and say that you're more likely to find fraudulent research and data in top journals because that's where people get rewarded for their careers. And you're probably less likely to find it in the less prestigious, less impact factor journals. So there needs to be peer review in place and there needs to be quality checks, and that has nothing to do with open access. Predatory journals are essentially journals that try to take advantage of researchers. They use open access in many cases because they understand that opens it up much quicker to the public. And what they try to do is con you in, but they don't have a peer review process in place, and they typically don't have the right editors. And you usually get these strange emails in some cases saying, highly esteemed Rector Mr. O'Neill, we value your article, please publish here. So what I do as a researcher is very simple. I do research also on the journal. I look at a journal. I first check, what journal is this? Who is in the editorial board? Who are their peer reviewers? Who has published there? If I recognize researchers from my field, top researchers I know, then I know this is a good journal. It's going to fit my research and it should be a so-called good journal. I will also do a check to see if it's recognized under certain peer review protocol standards like COPE. And if it's open access, I will check in a directory. So there is what's called the DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals. And this is a directory of journals that follow these protocols. The DOAJ reaches out to them for communication. And essentially, if you are listed there, as many of the open access journals are, you're so-called safe. You're on a white list. These are good journals. So for me, I will do my research on the journal, and I'll also check in the DOAJ. If it's not listed in the DOAJ, I will still go and check to see, is it a good journal? So just to be clear, predatory publishing, falsification of data has nothing to do with open access. It is not for only open access journals, and we see this happening even in prestigious journals. Is there another question before I jump ahead?
So yes, there are 4 other questions, but they're related to Plan S. So I would prefer to keep them for later after you present Plan S.
Perfect. So Plan S. Plan S hit like a bombshell. I think I was at that time at Eurodoc, so were you, Anna, I believe. And essentially what Plan S said was, we are sick of this situation. We have been trying to get open access for 30 years now. We started with source code and preprints. And we tried to help publishers over the last 10 years to move forward through hybrid publishing, and we have gained little ground. And we're tired of it. We want to know what we're spending our money on. We want these articles to be opened immediately, and we want it to be in fully open access journals, and we want it ASAP. So Plan S was essentially a list of criteria by national funding agencies. And essentially, it started with around 12, and since then it has grown. I don't know what the current number is. I've lost count. It's over 20 in any case. And what they want is that all articles that they fund to be in open access, according to certain criteria, it must be immediately open. It must be in fully open access journals. And this will start by 2021. So in, 3 months. And these funders, there's many of them. So you need to check always if you are getting a fund, let's say from your research funder in Slovenia, will they conform to Plan S? Okay, so I've taken a snapshot. This is a while back of some of the funders, but as you can see here, some of the funders are big ones. For instance, Science Europe is the association of funders. They're supporting this. We have national funders like the Netherlands, NWO, or the Research Council of Norway, or UKRI, the UK Research and Innovation Fund in the UK. But we also have charities and other associations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Health Organization, and just recently the Howard Hughes Medical Institution has joined, and some others. So you can check the list there yourself. This is also fully supported by the European Commission, and as a subset of that, the ERC, the European Research Council. That means that in Horizon Europe, so from 2021 forward, all projects funded under the European Commission will start aligning with Plan S. So it's crucial that you as a researcher understand what Plan S is, not just in this presentation, but read up on it afterwards. Check if it's going to affect you through your research funder or even institution if they've decided to support it. And also definitely for European projects, check if you fall under this. Now, Plan S is Plan S is essentially a set of guidelines on how to achieve full and immediate open access. There's different structures in place. The group of funders is called Coalition S with the funny lettering, as you see. They have a structure, they have an office, they have all the members who are these funders. They have so-called ambassadors. I am one of them. These are people who basically go out, answer questions, try to explain Plan S to the public and help negotiations between Coalition S and future funders or publishers or research institutions or even researchers. My focus here is with contact with researchers, making sure that researchers understand what Plan S is and why it is, and also vice versa. If there are comments from the research community, criticisms, or any other questions, that I feed them back to Coalition S. So when Plan S came out, it was highly polarized. It was quite shocking even. There was a small subset of fanatics pro Plan S, small subset of fanatics anti-Plan S, and then in between the rest of us who were trying to weigh what's good and bad and decide what we liked or didn't like. So, for instance, it was supported by the European University of Associations. This is 800 plus universities in Europe. It was also supported by LIRU. This is around 20 of the top, what they call the top research institutions in Europe. But then, unsurprisingly, it was not supported by STM, the Association for Publishers, specifically also commercial publishers. And surprisingly, it was not supported by a group of chemists, which was quite surprising at the time. Maybe not so surprising when you think that the American Chemical Society makes €500 million per year on publishing. And that may be one of the explanations why chemists originally were against this. So it was highly polarized when this came out in 2018. Now, Eurodoc, supported also by Mlada Academia, had a look at this. They engaged with two other researcher organizations, the Marie Curie alumni. So this is around, so Eurodoc represents around, I can't guess this anymore, but maybe 100,000 to 200,000 PhDs, mostly and postdocs in Europe, through national associations like Mlada Academia. Marie Curie represents around 15,000 MSCA researchers, and the Young Academy of Europe represents around, 250 of the I won't call them top researchers, but researchers who have received excellence grants in their country, like in the Netherlands, for instance, under NWO, or for instance, the European Commission, for instance, like an ERC grant. So they came together, they had a look. Long story short, they said, we understand why Plan S is there. We are not happy with how this is now, and we want change, and we support the principles of Plan S. They did not fully support all the bits and pieces, so they released a statement there, which you can click. Plan S went through a second round of revision, and they commented again saying, thank you for the changes. We also don't agree with this, this, and this. And in my view, Coalition S listened quite strongly to the researchers. They made many adjustments, not all, but they did take many of the comments into account. And I do believe Plan S, as it stands now, is a much stronger initiative. The principles, what are they? There's 10, not all of them are directly relevant for researchers, but let's go through them. 1, authors' institutions retain copyright and default CC BY. That means that you as an author, you never give up your copyright to a publisher. And when you publish, minimally, you should use CC BY, so that you must be cited. Now, there are conditions in there. I won't go into them for now. For instance, they may allow no derivatives in the humanities, so that if I publish a thesis or a research paper, that it cannot just randomly be translated into another language falsely, or that somebody cannot take it and misinterpret it to spread a different message. But crucially here, it's about keeping copyright. Now, you'd wonder, why don't we always keep copyright? No, many publishers coerce and push researchers into giving up their copyright or signing very specific types of licenses, not CC BY, for instance. And this happens very regularly. And maybe I should just say that nobody can force you to give up your copyright. That is illegal. Also not a publisher. So if you are ever asked to give up your copyright, ask them why, and ask them if they are forcing you to do this. I promise you, you'll not get an answer. 2, that there should be robust requirements for journals and platforms. That just means that they should meet a standard, these platforms, and not be, let's say, useless platforms or not follow standard protocols and so forth. 3, the incentives and support to develop journals and platforms needs to be in place. This means that we need to start helping researchers understand what open access is and open science. We need to support them in making their articles open so they know how to do this, and they get even financial support in some cases, and that there are adequate incentives in place for doing this. In other words, if I'm not rewarded for doing open access, why would I do it? And actually, in many cases, I'm rewarded for just publishing in a top journal. Nobody really cares if it's open or not. So there is a movement now in Europe, in many countries, in many institutions, to start recognizing open science activities and recognizing open access articles as an actual positive evaluation criteria. And Anna, you might say more about that, I don't know. 4, the fees should never be covered by the researchers themselves. It should always be covered by either the research institution or the funder, and in some cases even both. In the Netherlands, for instance, if I publish from Leiden under a certain grant, then if I click open access and there's an agreement there, 90% of the APCs will be paid immediately by the funder. Then the remaining 10% I'm supposed to pay, but then I go to Leiden and Leiden says, yes, we will cover the 10%. So me as a researcher, I don't pay anything. Crucially here, the researcher should never be paying. Now, in some cases where the researcher is left on their own, we would push for what's called, how will I say this, avoidance, not avoidance criteria, but where you as a researcher, if you can show that you're from a specific country, for instance, certain South American countries or certain Southern European countries whose economies may not be as strong as in the North or in the West, that you can get a waiver, so a fee waiver. That means you do not have to pay the APC. So crucially, we would push for no payment by researchers at any stage. 5, there should be lots of different business models, not just one, as in pay to read or pay to publish, and that the fees, the billing should be transparent. I should know what I'm paying for at all times and not just get we fixed your car, please pay €5,000 bill. 6, to do this, we need to align all of our policies and strategies across the institutions and across the European member states, and not just tackle this individually. Back to the original question, for instance, who is negotiating at what level? We would preferably want to see universities grouping together in consortia, maybe even countries grouping together into consortia, so they can push back against the publishers, because the publishers have a lot of power. If they cut off access to a research institution, it can cause chaos for the researchers. If I have time, I'll come back to an example where that didn't happen and where it did, but let's see. 7, we cannot push for open books right now. It's much more complicated. It's also more expensive. For instance, in some cases, to open a book, it can cost of an APC or a BPC, a book publishing charge or book processing charge of €15,000. So Plan S avoids that for now. Maybe that will come in the future. 8, hybrid models are not tolerated. We do not want this mixed version anymore unless they are in certain agreements where the publisher says we will move to open access. These are called transformative agreements. I won't go into that. That's at a higher level for the agreements between the consortia or institutions or funders. 9, funders will monitor and sanction non-compliance. So the funders need to check, are the researchers being open? And if they're not, give them a warning, for instance. We do not push right now for strong sanctions. I think that's counterproductive, but there should be monitoring to see who's doing what and are we doing it. And 10, the funders should assess research on the merit of the work, not on where it is published. In other words, they should not think research is good because it is published in Nature. They should think it is good because they've looked at the research, looked at the results, looked at the peer review, and decided it's good. These are the 10 principles of Plan S. I'm going to wrap up in a few minutes, Anna, so you know. There are a couple of routes to Plan S and how you can be compliant, but the core is basically either you go the green route, so you take what's called the author-accepted manuscript of your publication. That's usually the pre-final version accepted by the publisher with the peer reviews incorporated, and you put that in an institutional repository, 1. 2, you take the so-called gold route. You get it done immediately in open access. That means that in most cases you'll have to pay an APC, and that will be paid for by the funder. They have not set a cap yet, on how much they're willing to pay, but some of the members of Coalition S already have caps in place. For instance, FWF in Austria has a cap of 2,500 euros. So that shows you where some of these funders draw a line and say it's too much beyond this point. So that means they will pay 2,500 to you to pay for an article processing charge to go open. Beyond 2,500, they will not pay. And the final part here is that if your library or if your consortia is in an agreement with a commercial or non-commercial publisher, they have a specific arrangement in place, then you will be allowed to publish there for free. But I skipped that one because that's a bit high level for now. Maybe the final point to note here is what's called the Plan S rights retention strategy. That's only been released recently, and that is essentially giving more details on keeping your copyright using a specific license. And it's now actually being written into grant agreements from the funders. In other words, they are now writing into the grant agreement for your research fund, your research grant, that you will publish, for instance, CC BY, and that you will do other certain things. That means that you can never give up your copyright here, you can never transfer it, and you can never change that type of license because you have agreed a priori with the publisher. This means that should you decide to give a license or copyright to the publisher at a later date, you will be breaking your grant agreement, and that will be pulled, and your research funding will be pulled. So this is a way for the funders to help researchers more, so that they can go to the publisher and say, there's nothing I can do, it's in my grant agreement, I need open access, I need a CC BY license, and that's the only way we're going to work together. So this is a push from the funders through the grant agreements, through the researchers, towards the publishers for open access. I'm going to leave it there, and let's see if there's more questions. And I just leave up here the different channels you can go to for more information on open science. There's the Foster Training Program, there's the Eurodoc Open Science course, which will be finalized this week, I've understood. And then there's the Open Science Community Utrecht. This is a great initiative. And then there is the DORA, the Declaration on Open Research Assessment Guidelines for rewarding, for instance, open science, and also the Leiden Manifesto for changing the way we look at research and reward researchers. I'll leave it at that. Anna, if you have more questions, then please shoot.
Thank you, Gareth. Yes, we have several questions. So I will ask two questions together because they're somehow related. One is a kickoff question that I wrote at the beginning, and that is, will the implementation of Plan S make Coalition S grantees less competitive compared to researchers that do not need to comply with the plan? And related to that, Mitya Iskric asked, must Plan S be a global movement to be successful? What will convince big publishers to flip to open access if they still get a lot of money from subscriptions?
So let's take the last one first, I think. I do believe it needs to be global. And we are now, of course, 2 years further. It is global. So you need to look at many of the funders that are in there. They are from outside of Europe. They are from the Americas. They are from other continents. So Plan S, Coalition S has already gone global. As I said, a major American funder has joined. That's a huge move. Also, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So I would say that we need much more of these funders to start joining Coalition S, and we are now starting to see that happen. It's now gaining momentum as predicted, and I predict that many more funders will join and sign up over the next 5 years. Does it need to be global to succeed? No, I don't think so. As in, I think Europe could begin. That's what we've done. Europe has set the scene. This is a drive from Europe to show that we want to change this. And I think that Europe can take control of this for itself. But in the long run, yes, we want partners from outside of Europe to engage with us in this, to support us. And crucially, we would like this in the entire academic publishing sector. Academic publishing is global. That 10 billion per year is spent globally. So for it really to succeed, I think there's two levels. It should succeed in Europe, but ultimately it should succeed globally, and we should get more in. Now, if researchers are at a disadvantage, yes, they are to an extent. But first, we should say that they're at a disadvantage in many cases anyway. Not everybody can pay high APCs. So there already is a breakdown there on who can and who can't pay the high APCs. Secondly, what I would say is this is taxpayer money. you, by signing up on an agreement with a funder, agree to their terms and conditions. If you don't like the idea that Plan S is there, you don't have to take the funding. That's entirely your choice. There's many people who will take the funding and are happy to comply. So when it's written into the funding criteria, you don't have much of a choice. But at the moment, as we speak, yes, there are choices because it's not been mandated as yet. Now, I give an example. I need to publish an article very soon. So I went looking for places I could publish. And I'm a linguist, a theoretical linguist. So I said, I will use not only the Plan S criteria, but I will look for diamond journals because I do believe in diamond publishing. When I deselected the Plan S criteria and diamond journals, I got a short list and I found 3 which to me looked reasonable. I dug a bit deeper and I decided this is not really what I want. I don't recognize any of the editors. I contacted one, they never even responded if they do CC BY. So I said, right, I need to take a step up. I will now look for journals that charge an APC of what I consider fair open access, so maximum 750. Again, I got a short list and I identified 3 journals, which I was very happy with. One that I am going to submit to has an APC of 500 euros. I know the editors, I know people who publish there. This follows peer review criteria. It's listed in the directory of open access journals. So I am going to publish there. My funder will pay the 500 and I find that a reasonable fee for an APC. However, I've three options now. If I publish 2 more articles in the next year or 2 years, well, I can't publish in the same one over and over again. So my options are very restricted. Where do I go after that? So a problem right now is getting publishers on board, getting journals on board, and getting more journals to subscribe to the Plan S criteria so they can follow Plan S and help researchers do this. And of course, the researchers themselves have to want to do this. And my plea to researchers would be to start opening up, to start looking at Plan S, what it is and what it means, and to start pushing their own journals where they publish to go open. A key part of this, which nobody discusses, is the editorial team and the peer reviewers. Why have they allowed the system to get where it is? Why have they been supporting this system of increasingly high APCs and profits for major commercial publishers? So to give you an example of the profits that we're talking about, a good business might earn profits between, I don't know, let's say 5 and 15, let's say 5 and 15% to be generous. That's a good profit. It's a reasonable profit. Good top companies, ones we all look up to, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, they're earning profits in the realm of 15 to 30%. Without doubt. I think Facebook is up around 25% profits. That's considered huge. Some of the major commercial publishers are earning profits between 25, 30% and 42%. Elsevier's profits last year or the year before was around 40 to 42%. That's fantastic, of course. Check Elsevier stocks, they're high as ever. It's a big business. Why is it 40%? Well, you're all doing the work for free, or rather you're doing the work for them, paid by the taxpayer, and then you're paying them to gain access to your own work. So not surprisingly, the costs that they have are much lower than anywhere else. And this is why it's not transparent, because we don't know what we're paying for, but we do know that the money is making profits for some of these major publishers. So maybe just to summarize up on that, yes, Plan S needs to go global, and yes, more journals, more funders need to come in for this to be a success. In the start, there was FUD. This is going to ruin science. It's going to create mayhem. It's going to create distinctions in the scientific sector. Nobody's going to join. It's only a European initiative. That has not proven to be true. We see more people supporting this. We see more funders joining. We see more definition of the guidelines. And we see ultimately more people moving towards Plan S and towards open access. So I don't see this as a huge problem right now. I think we're in a transition phase. Like all transition phases, there will be issues and bumps, and we need to get over them together and move forward together, figure out how to reward this, figure out how to do this right so that it does not affect researchers or their careers or their publishing, and try to find a better way forward. That would be my take.
You said in your presentation that researchers should never pay the fee for publishing. What about researchers who are not part of an institution, maybe not part of an academic institution at the moment? So what is the solution in these situations if they want to publish?
So these researchers, I know many of them also in Leiden. We have quite a lot actually, for instance, external doctorate candidates. In many cases, they're paying themselves to do their research. They're actually paying to do it. And they won't have access to support for publishing. So this comes back to what I said earlier about the fee waiver. If they cannot get access to funding, and if they do not, for instance, want to submit to a diamond journal, that's always an option, then they have to look for journals that offer waivers and check if they follow the criteria and guidelines. I'll give an example. There is an excellent, I'll take a step back. An excellent open access journal for linguistics is, well, the original name was Lingua, tongue, language. This was a journal under Elsevier. It was very prestigious, high impact factor journal. And this was run by Johan Rohrijk, professor in Leiden, a colleague of mine. By the way, he's now the Plan S champion. He leads the ambassadors. And essentially, Johan and I think 32 of his editorial team asked Elsevier, please, we don't accept your model. We don't accept all these rules and criteria. We want to go open access. We want to be transparent, and we want you to bring the price down. Please help us. And this ended in no negotiation. And as a consequence, several years ago, Johan, as editor-in-chief, and the entire editorial board of, I think, 32 editors, reviewers, stepped down on the 31st of December of the year. And that night, they created a new journal online and released it called Glossa, Greek, not Latin this time, for tongue language. This is a fully open access journal. It's a diamond, well, it's not really a diamond journal as such, I guess. They do have an APC. It is between, I think, 300 to 750 euros. I'm not exact on the cost anymore, but they have also a waiver fee. What they say is, if you do not want to pay, you don't pay. Meaning, if you cannot pay, we will not charge you. However, if you can pay, if you have access to funding, we would like you to pay, for instance, 500 euros. So this is an example of a good journal that does charge a fee, but also recognizes that there are weaker researchers in the field with limited access to resources, and they are not charged. Now, some journals may have criteria, like I said. You have to identify where you come from, and if it's a specific country that is considered, let's say, a developing country, then also you can get a fee waiver. But if you're going to be able to publish in top journals, no, I doubt it. And then you really do have to fall on your own resources, which I'm against.
Now it comes to my mind when you're mentioning waivers. Aren't you maybe afraid that some researchers might abuse this system? Because, you know, it depends on the culture. In some countries, people, if they can pay, they will pay, but you have, you know, cultures where people will always try to avoid paying, and then too many people will abuse this system where you can say, I cannot pay, so I won't pay.
Not afraid at all. Researchers, in my view, the majority tend to work beyond 40 hours. They tend to work for free. They tend to do extra crazy amounts of work for science, for the public good, for discoveries. They help each other tremendously. Most of them are overworked and stressed. I don't see any issue here. I think most of them, the majority, will pay if they have it, and if they don't, they won't. Probably there's a minor percentage of those who just game the system. Fine, statistically, it's not an issue. It's flattened out by those that do pay and by the small number of these people taking advantage. I'm not worried about it at all.
Okay, regarding the costs and article processing charges, I have a question. Should we expect an increase in article processing charges after the implementation of Plan S?
I want to say no, but I have a bad feeling it will be a yes, because, like I said, we have journals now, for instance, that are diamond, not charging, and we have also journals that are charging low fees, maybe up to 1,500, maybe even 2,000. And my personal worry was that some of these would say, look, there is money out there. They're willing to support open access. Why not up our fees? again, I've no problem if the fees are fine. If it's an upping from 500 to 600 to 750, that's not a problem. If it's an increase from 1,000 to 2,500, that is a problem. But crucially, it should not matter. It still comes down to you as a researcher in how much you feel is right to spend on an article, and if you are getting the funding. Me personally, who has funding to pay, I do not want to pay personally beyond €1,000. Actually, I don't want to pay beyond really €500. That's kind of my personal cap. If I can get the right journal, which is Diamond, I will publish there. If I can't, and I need to publish outside, then I will pay the APC from my funding, and I will try to limit it to around 500. So my answer here, I'm not worried about them increasing fees. The market will stabilize at some point, but we should be paying what we feel is right, not what the publisher feels is right. And I would ask you, the researcher, to set a limit for yourself. Remember, this is taxpayer money, and remember, you're doing all the work. So for me, 500 seems reasonable to support a publisher to get the job done properly. And if it's a society publisher, to give them some financial support to their activities.
So what about Coalition S? Is Coalition S planning on imposing some cap on the article processing charges?
To my knowledge, no. But the individual members of Coalition S can impose caps if they want. FWF already has a cap. If I'm correct, it's 2,500. I don't see them changing that now either. The question mark is if others will impose a cap. My guess and my own approach would be, let's not impose a cap. Let's do this for a year, 2 years, 3 years. Let's look to see how much they are paying. And if we notice that it's ridiculously high, let's set a cap. But again, let's trust the researchers. Let's use common sense, and let's see where this stabilizes. If it stabilizes at 2,000, we don't need to set a cap. If it stabilizes at 5,000, I think we need to set a cap.
Okay, I have one last question, but before asking it, I would ask maybe if Matja or Nate or anyone here other than me has maybe another question to ask. Okay, checking if there is something new on Slido. If not, I have more questions. So how will Plan S affect small publishers such as scientific societies? What will be the impact for them?
Yes, this is a problem that we recognize. We do not want this to be only about the major commercial publishers. So personally, I feel that we should be supporting the small publishers, innovative publishers, so ones trying new models, new platforms. And personally, again, I believe we should be supporting more Diamond journals financially from funding agencies to help them and to encourage them and to promote them. Now, Plan S has done a study already. So sorry, Coalition S has commissioned a study on different business models. So not just the pay to publish or pay to read models, but many other types of models. That study is now online. So we are looking into how we can create new ways to do open access that is fair and reasonable. And right now there is a study going on for Diamond Platinum journals being done by Operas. So this is a study looking into the practices of Diamond publishers, what they need to support them, what they're doing. So we at Coalition S can understand that ecosystem more and see how we can help them move to Plan S and to basically stay and keep doing the good work that they're doing. That study, for instance, has already received, I think, 1,500 to 2,000 responses. So huge interest from the Diamond journal ecosystem, from the stakeholders there. So I would say that we need to support them.
Okay, we are now almost at the end, but I have another question, if I may. Does Coalition S have plans to extend Plan S from publications also to include data?
It's a pity that this is the last question because I could probably answer this for half an hour. I'll keep this short. If they have plans to do it, not to my knowledge, it's really only about publications, right? But stepping outside Plan S, Coalition S, I would say yes, we should be doing it. Ultimately, oil is the new data. We are moving to data, which is becoming more important than publications. Let's look at Elsevier, for instance. Most people think Elsevier is a publisher, a scientific publisher, let's say. Well, they are, but that's not how they term themselves. Have a look online. It's a data analytics company. My understanding is that of the profit that Elsevier makes, 40% now comes from scientific publishing, 60% from data. And I can predict here and now, in a few years from now, that will be 30% and 70% data, and that will continually shift down as we move towards big data and artificial intelligence systems. My personal view is that we should be taking data more seriously. We should be opening up our data sets. Minimally, data sets should be fair by design. So we should be starting to make our data fair from the very start, through data management plans, through the support of data stewards. Fair data does not mean it's open. So you don't have to open this immediately. You can always think about this after. But crucially, you're making your data set machine readable. So a machine, an algorithm, an index can find it, tell you about the accessibility, interoperate it, connect it with other data, so that me, the researcher, can actually use it and know what I can do with it and run my own algorithms on it. At a certain point, then I can open it up to the public. Now, this data is becoming more and more important because we're producing ridiculous amounts of it. Secondly, we as humans just can't access all this data. We can't process it. We've already passed that point. CERN, for instance, has I think now in the realm of 300 to 500 petabytes of data. And on the next run of the LHC, it will probably go up to 800 petabytes. They have tried to open up their data. And they've only managed to open up 1 petabyte so far. So you see the challenge here. So crucially, we will need systems to find this data, access it, and analyze it and combine it for us. And this, we will need artificial intelligence programs and smart algorithms and deep learning to do this. We're beyond being able to do this ourselves. And a year from now, we'll be even further beyond that. So we need the data. We need to tag it with metadata. We need to make it fair. We need to combine it and start doing new science, new discoveries. And this is, of course, where the European Open Science Cloud comes in, which does not focus on publications, but focuses crucially on publications, data, and software. And even more crucially, EOSC, the cloud, is or will be what we would call a web of fair data and services. So EOSC will connect data infrastructures. It will connect data sets that have been made fair so the machines can communicate between them. And then it will give us researchers access to this data. And through the services on EOSC, we will be able to combine, interoperate, analyze, visualize, and start doing amazing science with this. The machines will help us find the correct data. They will look for correlations in data sets we will never be able to even look at. They'll combine disciplines. And then ultimately, I, as the researcher, will get the results from this. And it's for me to pick what's important and for me to prove causation. So this is EOSC. This is the future. And we're moving towards data. And on my final point, I believe we should be publishing data sets. We should be making them fair from the start. I would not push for publishing all versions. You can if you want, but we should be publishing, in any case, finalized, fair-ified data sets that in principle, in best case scenario, should be open to everybody and definitely to machines.
Thank you, Garrett. That was a great presentation. Thank you for being with us and answering our questions. I'm especially happy that you ended by telling us about EOSC and how important it is, because that will be the topic of our event on Wednesday, which will be in Slovenia. Tomorrow we have another event that will be in English. It will be on reproducibility. Our guest will be Professor Michael Bośniak from the Leibniz Institute for Psychology Information. And then our last event in the Open Science 2020 series will be about research assessment, a round table about research assessment also in Slovenian. Thank you, Garrett, as a speaker, and I thank all the others for attending. I hope you found the event useful. The recording will be available on YouTube. Also for those who missed it. Now I will switch to Slovenia to conclude today's event in my mother tongue. And in English, I wish you a nice rest of the evening and goodbye.
Thank you, everybody. Anna and all, thanks.
Thank you, Gerard. Hvala vsem, ki ste nas poslušali. To je bil prvi dogodek v nizu Odprta znanost 2020. V naslednjih dneh pa nas čakajo še 3 dogodki, ki jih boste lahko prav tako spremljali tu na YouTube kanalu Mlade akademije. Več o Mladi akademiji preberete na naši spletni strani www.mladaakademija.si, kjer se lahko naročite tudi na naše novice, da boste obveščeni o prihodnjih dogodkih. Smo tudi na Twitterju in Facebooku. Poleg z odprto znanostjo se ukvarjamo s številnimi drugimi temami, ki so pomembne za doktorske študente in raziskovalce na začetku kariere. Če vam je všeč naše delo, nas lahko na koncu leta podprete z donacijo dohodnine. To je bilo to za danes. Še enkrat hvala, želim vam prijeten preostanek večera in upam, da se nam lahko spet pridružite jutri ob 18. uri.